What is up, people of YouTube? I'm your host Vernon. This is Lake Mead. Let's fish that. Alright guys, so I like to keep my channel as diverse as possible. What I mean with this is I try to not upload the same type of video week after week after week. So I am a bit annoyed that this will be my third consecutive carp video in 3 weeks. However, although I'm irritated by this, this is not train smash, because this is actually an important time of the year to show you guys this and to show you how to catch carp, so you guys can also get what you need to go out here to catch some carp. Okay, so for the next couple of months, being summer, it's going to be a good time to catch carp. From the beginning of spring till nearly the end of fall, it's a great time to catch carp. You can catch carp year round if you know where to find them. However, during summer months, it's a lot easier to catch carp, especially for us bank anglers, as carp tend to come to the shallows to feed, meaning it's a lot easier and accessible for us to catch carp during the summer months. And that's why I would like to show you guys the entire setup that I use, so you guys can try and replicate it and get out there and catch your own carp. Alright, but before we get stuck into it, there are a couple of key things that I need to explain. So let's quickly head back to the studio. So I started fishing for carp using a normal lead weight and 1 or 2 hooks, putting your corn on there, casting it out. This does work, you can catch carp like that, but we soon realized that by chumming the water, throwing extra corn in there, we had better success with fish coming into for the baits. Of course, they then eat all the corn around and eventually end up getting your hook, and you can catch them like that as well. This is where the feeder comes in. What a feeder does is it's something you cast out which chums where you are casting. The problem is that when trying to chum the waters, you can only throw corn that far. Unless you're using a slingshot or a bait boat, you can only chum as far as you can throw the corn. Whereas when you're using a feeder, you can cast out a lot further and you chum the waters where you cast it. The more you get into carp fishing, there's a lot more that you learn. A lot more specialized things like a hair rig, using stuff like boilies and tiger nuts to go and catch the biggest fish in the ponds and lakes. However, that is on the top end scale of carp fishing. The feeder is more somewhere in the middle, where you focus on getting as much fish as possible. And that is why I would like to show you guys how the little feeders work. You do of course get many different types of feeders. The problem is finding the feeders and finding the stuff you need when fishing with the feeders. That is why I found this company. They are not sponsors of the channel or the video, anything like that. This is just a good company that I would like to show you guys. I will, in the description part down below, I'll put a link to their website. The reason why I'm recommending these guys, they have quite a large selection of gear, tackle and baits from across the world. This means that there are certain South African products here as well, which means that I don't have to reinvent the wheel to try and do carp fishing. I can get the products that I'm used to and just use that to go and catch these fish. Alright, so I then ordered some products online, and even during our pandemic, it only took 3 days for them to ship it to me. So 3 days to get my little package. So nice, quick and fast shipping. But let's have a look at what we got. Alright, let's look at some of the products that I bought from these guys. First off, you will see Supercast Original Super Feed. This stuff is magical. This is what I'm used to using in South Africa. Although the grits worked well for me, this works a whole lot better. All it basically is some finely grounded corn and some binding agents. You just add water with this, and that's what we use on our little feeder. These small pieces of corn dissolve in the water and makes a feeding area that brings in the fish. Because it's small pieces of corn, the fish don't necessarily eat that, and they go for the bigger pieces of corn, which you will have on your hooks. Alongside this, we have our little feeder. These little feeders are a bit different from the cheap ones I'm used to getting in South Africa. They're not a lot more expensive, a few cents, nothing major, but these have these little rubber caps, which actually does help quite a lot protecting your line, especially against your little swivels. So these little rubber improvements I do actually quite like. I also got me some baits. These are the boilies. These little boilies are the things you normally use on something like a hair rig. Over here we have some oozes. Now these things come in all sorts of flavors, but to try and keep it simple, I just went for the plain little flavor. And all this is a little marshmallowy type bait. What this does, it floats, so it kind of lifts your bait out of the mud or grass or algae. Just lifts it a bit so it's easier for the fish to find. These ones are made to ooze flavor as well, releasing flavor into the water. However, because it's a plain one, I don't think this one actually has any flavor that releases, but some of the other oozers, they do ooze flavor into the water. And then we have some corn. Now these are the South African products that I am used to using. We use lots of flavored corn. We have different flavors in different ponds, different lakes. So we use lots of different flavors to try and catch these carp. I only have a few flavors that I got here, and all this is normal corn, just with some added flavor and water to keep it from spoiling. You can use normal corn. Alright, so these are some of the products that I recently bought from them. Let's quickly have a look at how to set up our little feeder. Here we have our little feeder, and the way we're rigging this up, we're going to use 2 swivels. At the top part of the swivel is where your main line is going to be connected. You can just tie on a little piece of line at the bottom part, and you make this piece of line roughly about 3 inches or so. You want your little feeder to be able to move around a bit, especially if it's down on the bottom and a fish picks it up. You want a bit of movement just to ensure that the fish has enough time to actually get the baits into his mouth before feeling that something's wrong. Okay, and then at the bottom part you tie on your second swivel, and you end up with a rig looking like this. Now please do check your regulations to see how many hooks you are allowed to use in the ponds and lakes that you are fishing. I, however, prefer to only use 2 hooks on my setups in any case, no matter where, no matter how much I'm allowed to use. I only use 2, for the simple reason the more hooks you have, the more you have opportunities for your hooks to get snagged on something. So I only use the 2, and you can place your hooks wherever you'd like. Lots of people only put them on the bottom swivel, so you have all your little hooks below your feeder, meaning that if it lands in the water, your hooks are all in one single space. I, however, prefer to have one hook above my little feeder. You make your piece of line so that the hook will be directly across the little feeder, one hook above, one hook below. That just ensures that you have a hook on the bottom part and a hook on the top part for the fish to see your baits a lot easier and get hooked on your hook. The type of line that I'm using on my little setup here, this is 12-pound monofilament line. Reason for that, you need to have some see-through line or some smaller line so that the fish don't actually see your line. The main line is quite thick and big, therefore we use a smaller, thinner line on the little feeder just to not scare off the fish, so they will actually go for your baits. This is going to be the weakest part in your setup, meaning that should one of the hooks get stuck on a rock or something, more likely this piece of line will break rather than your main line, meaning you might only lose one hook rather than losing your entire setup. So the type of hook you want to use on your feeder is completely up to you. Any normal hook should do the job. However, I have found that certain hooks work a bit better, especially if they have a bit wider gap, especially for when going for carp. You don't want a too long hook, so keep it short and a wide gap. And this little hook I have here, is a SSW. All that means is this hook is slightly offset. It's not a straight hook, it has a slight bend in it, which I find works better when trying to hook carp, as well as the little eyelid on the hook is slightly offset as well. It's not on top. That just helps to keep your knot and stuff away from the actual baits. I prefer using hooks like this when catching carp. A lot easier to get out than your more traditional smaller type hooks. These can sometimes get a bit tricky to get out of the fish's mouth, where something with a bigger, wider gap seems to work better. Okay, so now that we know what I use, let's explore how I use them. Let's start off by explaining my location. I am just outside of the Hemingway Marina. The reason why I chose this spot is because the entire Hemingway beach area, including Hemingway Fishing Pier and the Boulder beaches, are rather shallow. It's a gradual incline into the water. It's not a deep drop-off. If you compare this to Boulder Harbor, for instance, you have a short shallow part and then a big drop-off into deep waters. That's why Boulder Harbor is a great place for striper bass, because they tend to go into the deeper waters because they prefer the colder water, so they go into these deeper drop-offs quicker. Whereas here in Hemingway Harbor, because we have these flats, it's a great place to try and catch some carp, because as mentioned previously, carp come up to the shallows to feed. Okay, so the rods that you use are quite important for catching carp. Back in South Africa, I have two major setups that I used. One being a 13-foot fiberglass carp rod, a very stiff rod, but a great rod to use to power fish some carp. I'll explain what I mean with power fish in a while. The second rod I have is a 12-foot graphite rod, a lot more flexible, a lot better at casting out there. Not as great for power fishing, but a great way to get extra distance in your casts. My setup here in the US is a bit different, but it works on the same principles. The first rod that I have here is a Shakespeare ugly stick catfish rod. Now it's important that it's a catfish rod because catfish rods are made to handle bigger fish. So for a normal spinning rod, these are made to handle bigger catfish. That is why I'm using a catfish rod. This is a 8-foot rod, so not nearly as long as my normal carp setups, meaning you can't cast it out as far as you would with a 13-foot rod. However, 8 foot is still good enough to get it quite a distance out there to find the fish. The reel that I have on my catfish rod is actually one that I brought with me from South Africa. It has a little bait runner on there, and a bait runner is quite important when it comes to carp fishing. What a bait runner basically does, if you try to pull on the line, it won't budge. If you hit the switch on the bait runner, the line goes out quite easier. As soon as you start reeling in, the little switch will flip back and your line is stiff again. Now this is important for carp fishing, as the carp tend to grab your baits and they run either away from you or towards you, and you need the line to be pullable and stiff the moment you need to set the hook. And that is why I prefer using this reel. Even though it's an old reel, this reel is 18 years old, but it still works perfectly fine. On the reel I have 22-pound line. Reason for 22-pound line is because we are targeting big fish. You sometimes need to kind of force the fish to go away from little structures like the submerged trees and stuff like that. You need to kind of force them away. That is why I have 22-pound test on this setup. Second setup that I'm using is a big game hunter rod. This is a medium heavy rod, 7 feet, so it's a lot shorter than what I'm used to, meaning you don't get it casted out that far. But this rod is very stiff, very hard, and this rod is made for power fishing. When the fish tend to run into bushes, as soon as they get hooked, they're going to go for cover, so they will be running into bushes. You need this to kind of have a big backbone to pull the fish away from the cover, get them out of the cover, back into open waters. And that is why I have this setup for specifically places where you have lots of trees and structures in the water, this being my power setup. On here I have my new reel. This reel is only a week old, still testing it to see how it works and stuff. Quite happy with it thus far. But on this little reel I have some braid. Now I have 40 pounds braid on here, yet again for the same reason. This is my power setup. With 40 pounds braid you can quite easily move that fish out of the cover and you don't have to worry about your line breaking. Now very importantly, on this type of rod, the normal spinning rod, there is a big risk of, if a fish takes your lures and it darts off, if your line is quite rigid and doesn't want to move, there's a big possibility that that fish can take your rod and reel and drag it into the water. So when using normal spinner reels, it is very important that you loosen the drag on your reel, making it easier for the fish to take the line. It's a good idea to have it as loose as possible, with the idea being as soon as you hook a fish, you grab a hold of your reel when you're setting the hook, meaning that it cannot move. So you set the hook and then you tighten the drag when bringing in the fish. You don't want to tighten your drag all the way, especially with these big fish, because of the smaller line we are using on our little feeders. That is your weakest point. That is the line that's actually going to break if you have too much pressure on the fish. That is why you don't want to tighten up your drag all the way, so that it can still release some of that tension so you don't break your lighter line. Okay, so these are the two setups that I am using. Let's quickly bait them up and show you how I do that. So I'm going to start with the setup on my little feeder. The feeder does move around between my little swivels. A little bit of movement is good. And then we have our 2 hooks that we are allowed to use. I'm going to start off with my marshmallowy type things. The idea being that I would like to raise my corn or the baits just a bit off of the ground. I don't want it to be laying in between the grass. I just want to lift it a tiny bit. That is why I'm putting on these little marshmallowy baits. Now on something like a hair rig, this will be on the outside, on a little pin on the outside. But this setup is quite easy to use. We're just going to thread it onto the hook. So quite simply just hook it through the little marshmallowy thing, slide it all the way up, and that's what you're left with. Up next is the corn. Now I have my special flavored corn that I'm going to be using, and I'll share the secret with you guys. I've tested a couple of flavors here at Lake Mead, and the flavor that I found works best is the almond flavor. However, you can use normal corn straight from the can. It does also work pretty well, but for this video I'm going to use my almond corn. To try and make the bait nice and enticing, I'm using 2 kernels of corn per hook, and all I do is I just thread it onto the hook. And you end up with 2 pieces of corn and your little marshmallow float to keep it off of the ground. Alright, so that's the business end of our little feeder. That is the 2 hooks that we need baited, and that's what the fish should ideally go for. Now we need to set up the little feeder. So in this little bowl I have the cornmeal mixture that I am using on the feeder. You will see that it is small pieces of corn diced together with some binding agents in there. Now at the moment we cannot use this as is. We need to add water to make it into a paste to add it onto our little feeder. Alright, so we have our little cornmeal and I'm adding small amounts of water. We mix it all together to create a little corn ball like this. And that is what we're going to take and put onto our little feeder, compressing it onto the feeder. Okay, so we end up with a little corn ball like that with our 2 hooks. We're going to use this, cast it out there, and what that little feed ball does is it makes a targeted chumming area. It's a lot easier to cast this out there than throwing corn out there to chum. That is why we're using this little feeder to chum the waters, draw in the fish to go for our baits. Alright guys, so with the cast made, my baits are out there. I can start fishing as is at the moment. As soon as a fish takes this thing will be bending, going crazy. If you're close by, you can catch the fish, no problem. I am, however, busy with all sorts of other stuff while I'm out here. So I like to have extra little bells and whistles and warning signs, and I quickly want to explain these to you guys as well. First little thing that I have is an alarm system that goes onto the rod. This basically just clips onto the rod and you put your line through the little holes there, and as soon as a fish takes this, it moves these blue parts and a little alarm sounds. So all it does is it moves, it makes a noise and some lights, and that tells me that a fish has my bait. But this only works if the fish is swimming away from you, taking your bait out into the waters. From time to time, the fish do actually come closer to you and don't run away, they run towards you, and then this little alarm won't sound. So a better way of knowing what's happening down where your baits are is using little bobbers, or we call them back in South Africa policemen. Now I have a little corked one that's colored to make it easier to see. White on one side, orange on the other. Back in South Africa you buy these at the store. I have not seen any of these at any of the bait and tackle stores here, but you can make them yourself by using cork. Or if you don't want to do something like that and you have some bread with you, you can always make a small bread dough ball and you can put that on your line. This has a groove in there to put on your line, and I quickly want to show you guys what it looks like. Alright, so this little thing just slides up and down on the line as need be, and here's how this works. Should a fish take my baits and swim away, this little orange thing is going to move all the way down towards the water. Okay, should the fish actually come closer towards me, something like this will happen where it drops down towards the water. That's a good indication to tell me whether I've been having bites or anything like that. Alright guys, and that's what my setup looks like. We have a little alarm thing going, we have the bait runner on my little reel, meaning that if a fish pulls on this, the alarm will sound and the line can run freely out. Alright guys, so my second setup I have here, I have it close to the trees and bushes because I feel confident with this setup that I can drag the fish away from the bushes. That's why I have this one closer to the little submerged trees. We have a little bobber or policeman on there to show me when something happens to my line. And because we are using the spinning reel on this one, the drag has been loosened to the point where you don't need much to actually move the line off the reel. Very important, because if a fish takes this and it's not loosened, you might lose your rod and reel. If the fish is big enough, it will drag it into the water. If that is loosened, it can rather take line than taking your setup. Now normally when doing carp fishing, it is a very time consuming process. It's not active fishing. You can sit, you can swim, you can be busy with all sorts of other things while your baits soak in the water. That little feed ball that I threw in there is now going to be disintegrating, making a feeding area around my hooks. that's going to draw in fish from all over to come and try out my baits. For that reason, carp fishing tends to take quite a while. Normally it's something like 40 minutes after you've cast out before you start actually getting little nibbles or bites, but it can take hours. In some circumstances I've had to wait up to 4 to 5 hours before getting a bite. So you do not have to check on your baits every 10 minutes. If you keep bringing it in, checking if the baits are on there, you're only going to scare away the fish. So the best idea with this is you throw it out there and you leave it. The fish that will take the corn will sound off the alarms, and that's basically the only time when you have to worry about your rods, is when catching a fish, or if you want to try different flavors, you can bring it out back in every hour or hour and a half, change out your baits to see if you can find the baits that work in your lake or pond. If you haven't tried carp fishing yet, you guys are missing out on some good fishing. Like I said, it's a kind of a lazy fishing. You sit back and wait for the fish to come to your baits. It's not actively fishing, but it's quite a good adrenaline rush when you do get this big fish pulling on your line. I know it's difficult to find this type of stuff, but if you can and you can use it, I would recommend using it because it's a good way of catching fish. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this entire complete view of how I catch the carp. Hopefully you guys learned something from this and you can use this to catch your own carp. If you enjoyed this video or you learned a lot from it, please do give me a little thumbs up. If this is the first video of mine you're seeing, please feel free to go check out my channel, see all the different types of fishing videos I have on there. Feel free to hit the little subscribe button down below. You can always comment anything down below or ask any questions down below in the comments as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Alright guys, remember the sandbar I was talking about 2 weeks ago? Alright guys, to explain what I mean with the little sandbar, let's quickly walk out there and I'll show you what I mean, how deep I can go in before I actually start reaching deeper water. This is actually that sandbar. Those little stumps and trees are the things that I walked past to get into the water, meaning the water level was here about 2 weeks ago, and this is how far the water has gone back in only 2 weeks. So this is going to be a very dry summer for Lake Mead.